So, the dumbass wants to become a writer. There were more than 1,000,000 tears that were waiting to explode from behind that fake smile of mine, one which I had worn on my face for at least 45 years. A very large hidden bucket of sorrow that I never even knew lived inside of me or existed, until one day when it all come crashing down upon me with a vengeance. Over the past 30 years or so, and as best I could remember, I had written down bits and pieces of what happened to us kids when we were hung, burnt, kicked, beaten, and molested while living in that abusive Jacksonville, Florida orphanage. The Children's Home Society was nothing more than a concentration camp for children, a prison where children were made to feel small, dumb, and useless to the world. "Why should you learn anything if you're useless to the world?" were the words of Mother Winters, the head matron. One day I sat down at this ridiculous-looking box called a computer, which several friends of mine had talked me into purchasing, and I began to fit all the small pieces of my life together. I began to realize within hours that the pieces were fitting together like a puzzle without any square outer edges. I worked non-stop day and night for weeks trying to make sense of what was appearing to me to be some sort of odd invisible picture trying to take shape right before my very eyes. Now came the hardest part of all, trying to learn and understand how to express oneself and put something into words. I mean, I only had a 6th grade education under my belt. I really didn't understand words, and I never did. Words are just plain old words. They're just a bunch of stupid old letters all put together. And that's what I told my teacher when I was in grade 5. But she wouldn't listen to me. She told me that some words were verbs, others were adjectives, and things like that. But when I looked at them on the blackboard, they didn't do anything like action things at all. They just laid there on the blackboard being words, just like I said they were. Most of the time I just started crying because, like Mother Winter said, I didn't know how to think right like all the other children anyway. I guess I had finally reached a point in my life where I had become afraid to learn anything. Besides, I got laughed at most of the time, and I was made to sit in the corner for almost a whole year with a dunce cap on my head. Over the next several months, I threw away hundreds upon hundreds of pieces of paper because I could not spell or express myself correctly. I went down and I bought 3 dictionaries, but I couldn't find any of the words because I didn't know how to look them up because I didn't know how to spell them. One night I was home all alone because my wife was working the evening shift at the restaurant. I got up from the keyboard and I walked over and I turned on the radio. The song "What a Wonderful World" by Louis Armstrong was playing. I sat back down at the keyboard and I wrote, "Dumbo the Orphan." I was 7 years old when someone first made a comment about how ugly and dumb I was, and how big my ears were, and how they stuck out from my head. I suppose I could have lived with those words, but the fact that I had to carry a brown paper bag lunch to school every day, that was a sign that I was from the orphanage and that I had no mother or father and that no one in the world wanted or cared about me. That was a very tough road for one little boy to travel. One day I could take no more teasing, so I threw down my brown paper bag lunch and I just flapped on my big ears until they flew my little heart away. I sat there, I dropped my hands down to my sides, and I sat there reading what I had written. I wiped my nose, which was starting to run, and I started the print mode on the computer so I could actually hold in my hands what I had written. I then realized that the song I had been listening to had just ended, which meant that without thinking, I had written the story in less than 3 minutes. I read it, the printed page, laid it down on the desk, got up and walked into the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror over the sink, rubbing my balding head. I reached up and pushed my 53-year-old big ears out as far as I could get them. Then I pressed my lips together as hard as I could, closed my eyes, and I just stood there remembering that terrible day when I was told how ugly and stupid I was. I returned to my desk and I picked up the story which I had written. When I looked at the paper, I immediately lowered my head onto the desk and buckets of tears streamed from my eyes. I cried like a baby for more than 10 minutes. When I finally pulled myself together, I once again looked down at the wet paper. Evidently, while the song had been playing, I unknowingly underlined all the verbs in the story in red ink, just like my teacher used to do. At the very top of the page, where the teacher always used to place not just an F, but an F minus, which was the worst grade you could get, I had given myself a very large 4-inch red A+. I guess the big, dumb, big-eared, dumbass kid who couldn't understand why he was the only idiot in the world, who could not see words move like action, had finally learned how to make a few words stir by using the sadness in his heart. And now, after 30-something years, he had finally become somewhat of a writer.